I had this pair of white earbuds and they were my favorites. I colored on them with markers so I wouldn't grab the wrong pair if I was ever in a hurry. One night, one side of the earbuds stopped working. No amount of tinkering with them would fix it. I got angry and I threw them at a wall. One of the earpieces flew out and broke the wire. I knew there was no fixing that, so I just used my other pair of headphones. I was really angry that my best pair was broken. I even ranted to my mom about it. I know for a fact this all happened because I asked her about it this morning. The reason I asked her about it in the first place was because earlier I put on a sweatshirt that I haven't worn in a week or two. When I put my phone in my pocket, I felt a pair of earbuds. I was confused because I was already using my headphones. I pulled the other pair out and it was my favorite pair and the earpiece was back together. I was so confused. I tried to pull the earpiece out. When they break once, they always fall out or come out really easily, but it wouldn't budge. I switched them with the pair that I was already using, and they worked. I couldn't have dreamt up my earbuds breaking. My mom remembers me ranting about it, and I remember seeing them on the floor throughout the week and looking at them with disdain for breaking on me. I could have put them in the sweatshirt at some point, but I couldn't have just fixed them as the inner wires were completely snapped off. I'm not upset that I have them back, I'm just really confused and freaked out as to how they got fixed. I was walking to the library on campus with my friend today. The weather was pretty crummy, light rain all day. Neither of us had thought to bring an umbrella with us, so we had our hoods up, which limited our peripheral vision. All of a sudden, the rain started pouring, and I mean loud torrential downpour. I made a surprised noise and jumped a little. Then, the downpour stopped and the rain just went back to normal. I looked over to my friend who was turning around and calling for me. She told me that I just completely disappeared for a moment, and I said I was just trying to dodge the heavy rain. My friend looked confused and told me the rain was never heavy today. Since we had both been outside, she would have noticed it. I asked her what she meant by me disappearing, and she told me that I just suddenly popped out of sight while she was talking to me. I don't really know what to think. Can two people share the same glitch, or was this all some weird coincidence? Something that I can't explain just happened to me. A few years ago, I bought 2 bracelets, one gold and one silver. I remember this well because I rarely buy or wear jewelry. A few minutes ago, I was cleaning up my vanity when I noticed the silver bracelet in a weird place. The strange thing is, I had just had the same bracelet in my hands not too long ago. I froze for a moment and then went to look where I thought the bracelet had been earlier. Sure enough, there it was. There were now 2. What the... I never bought 2 of the same bracelet. Never. Yet here they are as I hold them both in my hands. I feel really strange all of a sudden. Something isn't right here, but there has to be a logical explanation for this. I keep checking them, worried that one might disappear. How silly. It's not like it was a forgotten item I stumbled upon, though. If I had bought 2, which would be weird, or is accidentally given to, wouldn't I remember? About a decade ago, my wife and I decided to meet for a meeting at the school district's administrative office at 11:30 a.m. This was the first time the school had decided to hold a meeting at the new venue, which was miles away from my daughter's school. I got out of my office in time, and as I was nearing the destination, my wife called me announcing that she was already there. She told me that parking inside was full, so she had parked outside on the street. She suggested that I park behind her since there was ample parking space. Less than a minute later, I spotted her Camry parked on the street. Many cars do look alike, so I did confirm the registration plate number as well as the religious shining conda hanging from the visor. I could see my daughter's lunchbox from the previous day on the back seat too. There was one problem though. There was no parking space anywhere around. It wasn't that all the parking spaces were filled in, there were simply none to begin with. I moved parallel to my wife's car and she was not inside. The plan was to go inside the building together. I checked the time and it was 11:20, so there was plenty of time for us to have walked in together. Irritated, I called her and asked if she had already gone in. She said no and that she was still inside of her car waiting for me to arrive. I told her that I was just next to her car and there was no sign of her. She said that it was no time for my silly jokes. I confirmed that her car was parked in front of building number 6344 or whatever it was, and she gave me another number that differed by 60. I checked the registration plate again and it was my wife's car. I decided to drive to the building number that she had mentioned, and sure enough, there she was in her Camry waiting. To this day, I swear it was her car in the other parking space. This happened about 2 years ago when I was in driver's ed. The classroom portion of the class was several sessions of 3 hours and was done through my local YMCA. It was about halfway through the course and halfway through that night's class, so I'll say it was around 7:30 p.m. The classroom was fairly large, and the tables and chairs were set up in a U-shape that made it so everyone's back was to a wall. One of the walls was lined with windows, and that was the wall my back was turned to. It was in the middle of the lecture, and we were learning about the proper technique for merging onto a highway. The teacher was drawing the roads on the board when all of a sudden I heard a window shattering, followed by the loudest buzzing sound in my ears. At the same time, it was as if someone had slammed my head onto a table with an incredible amount of force. The most startling thing was when my head hit the table, I didn't feel it. As a matter of fact, I didn't feel anything. My head felt lighter, but for some reason I couldn't move a muscle. It felt as if my entire body was locked in place while everyone in the room started screaming. I could hear the sound of chairs being knocked over as some people ran, and I even heard a few people vomiting onto the tile floor. This whole time I was just staring at the white table that was now covered in brain matter and blood. I wanted to scream, but nothing came out. Then, in an instant, I was back. Everything was normal again except for a slight ringing sensation in my ear. I immediately turned around to see the window still intact behind me, and the teacher had just begun drawing the picture of the highway on the board again. Needless to say, I didn't sleep well that night, and I sure as hell wasn't going to drive home when my dad came to pick me up. About 4 years ago, I was taking a course at the local university. It finished around the end of rush hour, so the bus home was always a bit crowded, but not overly so. One evening, I got on and started making my way towards the back, where there were a few empty seats. I specifically noticed one particular man as I passed him by. He was a few years older than I was, maybe in his early 30s, and his eyes were the single most striking shade of blue I've ever seen. I've yet to see another pair that looked quite like his. They almost looked fake for how brilliant they were. At the same time, beyond this passing notice, I didn't acknowledge him in any way. I settled in and took out a book to read during the ride. Every so often I would look up and the man would have moved back a few seats. People would get off and he would move into their place. Either way, my stop was coming up, so I continued to read. Eventually, I felt a sharp blow to my shoe, and looking up, the blue-eyed man was sitting across from me. He had kicked me. The contact was oddly familiar, the way you might playfully push or touch a friend to get his attention. He and I locked eyes, and two emotions crossed my mind. The first was recognition, something akin to nostalgia, as if I were looking at someone I knew very well who needed to tell me something. I almost spoke up with a friendly hello before falling back. I felt as if it were completely normal for this stranger to get my attention this way, but clearly it wasn't. That's why the second emotion was fear. I gave an awkward smile and glanced to the woman next to me, mostly to seek some sort of ally. She offered me an apologetic look. She saw what he had done too. The woman beside him saw him as well, and she had put her book down to regard him and me quizzically. Either way, I decided to ignore the man in hopes he would leave. I returned to my book, forcing myself through the rest of the page. When I looked up only a minute or so later, the man was gone. I scanned the bus, but he simply wasn't there. Another man, older and without those blue eyes, was sitting in his place. The woman beside me was staring nonchalantly ahead where he had been, seemingly unperturbed by his disappearance. The woman beside him was reading her book as if nothing had happened. I should note that the bus itself hadn't stopped, so he couldn't have gotten off. Chills ran through me and I stood up and pressed the stop button. I left the bus early, looking for him in vain on the way out. I've never seen him again, and I still can't explain where he went. Part of me wishes I had spoken to the other passengers who had seen him. Either way, in my few moments of reading, he seems to have blinked out of existence and left someone else decidedly less frightening in his place. This story takes place a little over a year ago. I had taken my ex on a date to some caves that were about 3 hours from my home. We were headed back on a 4-lane highway. It was around 10 p.m. I was driving and all was normal, and suddenly I found myself waking up. The effect was strange. It was like going under anesthesia in reverse. My vision started in the center of my eyes and widened. When I woke up, I was still driving, but I was no longer on the highway. I was on a different road heading west. The highway we had been on was going south. Once I fully came to, I began to panic, thinking I'd had some type of seizure. I turned to my ex and asked her how he got there. My fear about seizures quickly faded as panic and horror gripped her face. She also could not remember how we got there. After a bit of freaking out, I started up my GPS and got us back to the original highway. We took an exit and we were back on our way, or so we thought. After driving for about 10 minutes, we came to a stoplight and had to wait. I noticed that there were no other cars around us and it was a bit foggy out. I also remembered that this highway had no stoplights between cities. After 15 minutes of driving with no exits or turns, we had returned to where we lost time. Keep in mind that when we came down before, there was no stoplight, and I have never figured out where we were or what happened in that lost time. I have never had epilepsy or hallucinations. I do suffer from clinical depression, and I take Prozac to treat it. I had been on the med for 2 years at this point with no ill effects. I was under no stress and I was not tired. I have never experienced anything like this since. As far as I know, my ex was of sound mind and was on no drugs of any kind.